Right, good morning everybody, and welcome to the meeting. It had been my intention to start the meeting by asking everybody to observe a minute's silence for people who were killed and injured and traumatised by the events in Manchester. But as you probably all now know, there is a national minute's silence at 11 o'clock. So we won't observe one now, but we will at 11 o'clock. So wherever we are in mid-sentence at 11 o'clock, we will stop, stand, and observe the minute's silence. I think that a bell or alarm of some sort in the building will probably ring at 11, so don't be surprised, and it's not a fire alarm if that happens. But if it doesn't, I've got a watch, so I will know when it's 11 o'clock. So that was the first bit of introduction I wanted to say. And then secondly, by way of introduction, those of you, I think, will have been made aware that there's a paper that wasn't on the original agenda for this meeting on our digital strategy. We will be taking that in a couple of minutes, and as a result of bringing this extra item onto the agenda, the public session of the board will run on for about another 45 minutes or thereabouts. So it's a longer meeting. If anybody needs to go, that's understood. Right, I think that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Michael Marr is ill, so is unable to be here today. Otherwise, I think everybody on the board is here. Are there any declarations of interest anybody needs to make this morning? Okay, that's fine. Minutes of our meeting of the 26th of April, are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Okay, that's good. There are two items on our action log that need to come back to the board. The dates have not been fixed to do that. I think we do need to fix dates, otherwise these things have a habit of dragging on, so we will do that. Is there anything arising anybody else wanted to raise? Okay, then without further ado, we're going to go to the additional item on the agenda, which is our digital strategy. Pete, you're extremely welcome. I think you're going to be a very regular attendee at the board. This is a really important part of CQC's strategy. This is quite complex. It's quite multifaceted. It's going to be something that will run over a period of time. It is something we are going to get right. I'm absolutely clear and determined and confident that will happen. I think it's important to say that it's not the case that our existing systems are about to fall over. There is a whole new way that we can use digital technology to do our job and to do it better and more efficiently and more effectively. That's what this is all about. So with that, by way of introduction, Pete, can I hand over to you, please?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Yes, absolutely. I'll reiterate that point as well. So I came to the board in the private session a month ago to explain where we were, and this is an update as to where we've got to since that point. So the first couple of months here were about understanding the landscape, understanding the position, and understanding the priorities for the Care Quality Commission. I think the critical part there was making sure that we retain the focus around those items that are going to give the most impact as early as possible, both on the effectiveness of CQC in terms of its regulatory and improvement activities and on the efficiency with which we managed to do that. So those were the drivers behind that. We went through an exercise, internal consultation, to make sure that we understood what was most important to the organisation itself, not as a technology team, but as the organisation telling us what they thought was most important, and we went through a prioritisation exercise to get to that. On the back of that, we now know where we're beginning the journey. This is a beginning of a journey, and it's very much how do we put some feet forward rapidly to start moving in the right direction to help that transformation that will help CQC to move forward and really take a slightly different way of achieving impact at great speed and great effect within health and social care. And in doing that, we will continue that prioritisation throughout the year. This is not a one-time roadmap for the next 12, 24 months. This is a where are we starting that's most important, that we can build from, and everything that we do build will be a foundation that we can build from, not a point solution. And in doing that, we've identified the first 6 areas. So it's sort of 3 areas where I would consider them to be more change in the way that we've chosen to do big things, and 3 which are more running the organisation as we get there. So the first one is around registration. Now, we register the providers as we need to at the moment, but registration itself underpins quite a lot of other activities that we need to perform well. And in a complex environment where we're moving to new models of care, and there are different ways of thinking about providers, there's different ways of understanding providers, there's different ways of managing the intelligence that Helen can talk about in terms of how we get to really understand what's important. We need to get that registration process right. We also need to think about it from a customer perspective. The people that we register need to be able to register with limited burden in a way that is helpful to them and that is helpful not just to us but them directly, the system as a whole and others out there. And they need to be able to do that easily with limited handoffs, limited numbers of repeat sort of registrations, make it as simple as possible. So all of those things are really important. So that's chosen as the first thing we need to really look at. In the initial selections, it's worth stating that we, in addition to the priorities that people expressed, we also looked at the capabilities that we have at hand now, because there are some things that we might really want to do right now, but will take a little bit longer to get to. And there are some things that we can do right now, and if we do them right, they will form the foundations of those other things we need to achieve. So that's where the information collection service, for example, the second priority we're talking about, comes in. We are ready to go now. We understand the problem. We have the team on the ground, and that will form the foundation of quite a lot of other services that we need to put in place. So that came out very strongly as well. We're then looking at enabling the information-led approach to regulation. So it's really important to us that as one of our strategic priorities that we fully evidence-based and understand what's going on through new ways of looking at large volumes of information or specific types of information, really using some of the algorithmics and automating things as we can. And to make that possible, we've got to get the data processing, the data handling all right under the hood. So that's a real key priority for us as well. In addition to that, we know we have an end of contract point with our core networking and desktop services. So we need to do something about that. We're doing that jointly with our ALB partners in a way that will be beneficial to us and to the rest of the partners within the DH family. Then we're looking at what we're calling a stones in their shoes project. So effectively, while we're looking at these 3 or 4 big change pieces, what we don't want to do is ignore things that are not quite what they should be, but at the same time not expose ourselves to not really prioritising and doing another 10 things as well. So this is very much a constrained programme of work where things that frustrate employees on a regular basis or frustrate those we work with on a regular basis that are relatively easy to solve have an active focus, active management, and are directly addressed as fast as we can. So that's the stream of work in the stones in their shoes. And the last piece is everything else badged under business as usual, and with a really clear assessment that we are reviewing that carefully to understand, is it really business as usual, or is it a lot of small change that was unnecessary? And really constraining that pipeline so that we can use that to free the space that's required to deliver the other objectives. In doing that, we're then looking at what's coming next, and there's a few things. So there are some pieces that we should be able to deliver ahead of the change to our core IT contract around the right devices. If we've got staff out in the field, making sure that they've got access to the information they need with the right way to collect it, all those sorts of things. And we also know that report writing, in terms of making it easy for our staff to achieve quickly, and also making it easy for different users of that information to access what they need in the right way rapidly, are really critical parts to moving forward. So a board, as a trust, requires a different set of information than an individual looking for a care home for their family member. But the same raw information underlies those, and we need to make that an information-centric model that can deliver both at the same time. So that's the core strategy we're laying out at the moment, and that's what we're looking to achieve over the next 12 or so months.
I thought it was a fantastic paper. I found it very helpful myself, and that's a very good, quick canter through the headlines, so thank you for that. Questions, comments from the board? Sorry, Paul, please.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to see so much progress being made so quickly. I guess one of the questions that I had in my mind as I went through the prioritisation process and looked at what came out of that was around how we take into account the complexity of the potential complexity of a particular process that we're looking at, the potential risk to the organisation of that particular area going wrong if we in selecting what we've chosen to do. So, for instance, if you were in a big utility with a big billing system, that's a really high risk thing to do. So you look very carefully at how you do that. Whereas an email process is a pretty standard thing which you can bring in or developing a website. But have we taken that sort of into account?
So we definitely have taken that into account, particularly in this initial phase. It's a little bit implicit in the paper, so there is a table in here with speed to mobilise, and speed to mobilise has within it a degree of that complexity. But thinking about some of the things that we've actively not prioritised that were on the agenda earlier, so for example, enterprise content management, looking at our whole records management and replacement for CRM type processes, that is an operational transactional system within the organisation that cannot go wrong on a daily basis. And that's not where we're going to start, because part of what we're doing here is looking at new ways of working, bringing in agile methods of delivery, and we can't have core systems being developed while people are learning how to do things differently. So that's been actively chosen to not be the first thing. At the same time, if you look at the report writing, partly why we deferred it is it requires us to collect information effectively and to store information effectively about providers as they are registered appropriately, and those both rely on the first projects we talked about. So trying to do that at the same time would be a poor way of trying to answer that question. We want to make sure we're getting capabilities right. We've considered a lot of this from the standpoint of capabilities and outcomes rather than systems. So I think historically CQC has sort of talked about technology in terms of systems, CRM, the wide drive, the various ESB, but actually what we're looking at here is what's the outcome for the people who are using it, both inside and outside of the organisation, and what are the core capabilities such as search, taxonomy, that you would need to underpin any of those systems. So we're focused from that angle, and we know which of those sit right at the bottom of the foundations, particularly in the data management space, and that's where we're addressing things first. And we're doing that, though, in a way that exposes them to test them in a simple way that's slightly disconnected from the core system so that we can manage the risk. I hope that's...
Jane and then Jora.
Thank you. Well, I like this very much. Lots of energy, lots of common sense, really user-led. What comes over is a lot of lists. And I was just wondering, I'm presuming the next document, next iteration will start to give a more sort of organisational strategic look, a more sort of framework of what we're trying to do. I don't want to sort of start with that because it might stifle the whole thing, because you're obviously dashing around and talking to people and finding out what they really want. But presumably we're going to end up with a more sort of board-level document where you go, oh yes, that's the thinking, that's the overall sort of thinking.
We can certainly look at presenting this in that way if that's how you would like to see it, absolutely. What we're looking at next really is saying, now that we have 6 core work streams, is organising everything we do into those 6 core work streams so that we understand the detail of what really needs to be done in those areas. We can explain why those 6 core work streams collectively meet the strategic objectives, if that's the piece that's missing at the top. That work was definitely done in defining the 16 core objectives that we were looking to deliver as an organisation before we went through the prioritisation. So if there's a piece missing in the presentational puzzle, very happy to fill that out.
Jora?
Pete, this question about this, there's 2 aspects on this paper. One's more of a technical change, which your team can manage fairly internally and independently. And the other one's a sort of business change, where your team needs to collaborate with other units across from inspectorates to operational staff. And we know that, projects are difficult when decisions are made later and later and later. So if you've made a decision then you've developed it, and then you're testing it, and then you have to rework that. Have you got the right sponsorship and the right business partnership to allow to make those decisions, those very senior level decisions, trade-offs, or is that something you have to build into your thinking, the whole resource model, not just the technology resource, but across the whole organisation?
Very, very good point, Joe. I absolutely agree. There's a couple of pieces to that. So it's something that we've discussed very openly and very actively with ET. There's the highest level sponsorship is in agreement that that is something we have to achieve, and we've had that very open conversation to achieve that. It will be about when we actually deliver the first things, which the first one starts next week, about how that happens at the mid-level of the organisation. Helen and I were speaking about this just this morning, about how we make sure that first project is kicked off in exactly the right way. Part of the approach to this is to looking at how do we do this specifically for a couple of key projects first, rather than how do we try to educate everybody across the organisation. It's do two things really well and then have others shadow and learn and mentor and build from there and grow, because I think that's the only way to embed it in the organisation. But we're hoping.
At 11 o'clock, we'll observe a minute's silence in memory of those lives that were lost in
Andrea.
Thank you, Peter. And just to add further reassurance for that, Jora, because obviously two of the areas that Peter's identified from the work that we all did as priorities are around registration and using adult social care in terms of the data collection side of things. So both of them, obviously, I'm personally absolutely delighted that they're in the priorities, and have been working through, particularly on the registration one, with Joyce Frederick, our new Deputy Chief Inspector, with responsibility for registration, and the Registration Improvement Board, to absolutely make sure that we're kind of knitting together what we're doing from a methodology and an operational improvement side of things with what Pete and his team will be doing from a digital side of things, so that we can together make those differences, because we can't do it without kind of having that and having that kind of joint working. So I think from an operational strategic point of view, we're absolutely aligned with Pete's objectives there, because they're supporting ours as well, which I think speaks to Jane's point about how does this fit in with the overarching strategic objectives that we all agreed last year, and I think it truly does. But clearly the proof of the pudding is always in the eating, and that point about evaluating as we're going along, making sure that we're learning, so that what we do in the first few projects that we've prioritised, we use so that we can improve what we do elsewhere is again something that we're very mindful of.
Firstly, congratulations on what is a very promising beginning to what's obviously a huge piece of work. My question is about the decision-making process you anticipate or is being planned in relation to the money. Quite understandably, this paper gives an extremely broad estimation of what this will cost, and you don't even know quite understandably what's capital and what's revenue. But how do you anticipate we as a board can be assured that the right decisions are being taken about the money, and we're not committing ourselves to some open-ended business which one has heard of happening in other organisations?
Absolutely. So, yeah, very, very good point. Part of this is about a slightly different style of governance around the money, particularly. We have looked at other ways that other organisations are approaching that, and we'll continue to do that in more detail to make sure that we're rigorous around the governance. The critical parts here, I think, are about committing to small spend early to pilot, test, and get a much better answer about what the real cost is before you go further, and then have an additional gated process before you move on. And that's the right way of testing the approach. Because if you work specifically on a large waterfall approach to say we believe this is the answer, knowing full well that it's not really, then you naturally get into trouble. And it's been proven over and over that that model doesn't work, no matter how rigorous it appears from the outside. But if you look at an agile approach, it's much more about testing the hard things first. Always do the thing that's most difficult in the project in the first few weeks, Don't do the things that look nice and shiny and then wait for the hard part at the end. So absolutely test those, get the rigour, and from that you can get a much better estimation on what to do next. And at that point you can go back to say, having done the first bit of work, we now think the real answer is more like X. Is this still value for money for the organisation?
All right, thank you all very much. Had you finished, people? Were you going to add anything on?
I almost finished. I think the extra piece is saying that while we should have those additional gated processes inside the organisation, we need to be careful that we don't go around an entire loop of 7 or so approval gates. Each time we then make a small step from one part of the project to the next. So we need an overarching level commitment, internal gates, and then an ability to call to things if that's the right answer.
Paul.
Thank you. Just to say that ACGC did look at or talk a little bit about this over the weekend, and Rob remembers. We understand that some of our governance processes will be fine in relation to what Peter's talking about. Some of them will not be quite as agile enough in their own right to cover what Peter's trying to do here. So what we've asked is for Peter and the governance team to go away and look at what the framework will be for the digital transformation space, so that we can make sure we know how to keep on top of this in terms of monitoring without getting in the way of progress, unless we need to get in the way of what's happening because for the right reasons, if you see what I mean. So we understand the need to do that, and not to make sure we've got the right information coming to us as a board.
Lewis.
It's an impressive document. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, so let me just confess that. I've got a reasonable idea of how the health service works and what patients want. And I just want to make sure those two things are aligned. So forgive me if it's already in the paper, in a paragraph that I've already read and not totally understood. Selecting it does feel a little bit as if this is the organisation looking at itself and deciding what it needs. But this is a public organisation serving the public and overseeing the work of hundreds of thousands of staff. So I just want to make sure that we've got that part right, and that the priority setting has reflected that wide public role. It's hard to be against the top priority to develop cost-effective, responsive and intelligence-led registration. I'm in favour of all of those adjectives at all times. But it would just be very useful, and it may not be your paper, but it might just be an accompanying discussion. I just want to make sure that I've understood what will be better, what will be better for staff, what will be better for patients, and have we as a board properly discharged our responsibility to influence the work by reflecting the priorities that we're here to represent.
Can I just, before you give your part of the answer, come back to how we got here? This comes out of the strategy. The strategy comes out of a huge amount of consultation with both users and providers, as well as internal debate. So I think at the top line, Lewis, do we know this is what is needed? I would say yes, from the work that we all did then. Then I will hand over to Pete as to how his paper then picks up on that sort of top level.
Yeah, because I think it's a sandwich type model, and we're in the middle of with a jam at the middle. So at the moment, I totally agree with Peter's bit there that we're working towards objectives that were already set from a strategic context for the organisation as a whole, and this is how we'll deliver some of those in the right order to get them done. Then there's a piece below that in terms of the implementation model for doing this, and that's very much about a user-centric design model. So if we're going to collect information from people and add burden in doing so, that's got to be of benefit to us. We've got to play it back to them for benefit to themselves, and it's got to result in an outcome that's better care for the people using the services. And we need to measure that. So there'll be a lot of measurement in the way that we deliver the services that we build to make sure they're actually being used, they're actually delivering an outcome that's beneficial to people, and that we're actually considering users, end users, at the very heart of everything we do on a daily, weekly basis, not at the beginning and then again at the end of a project. So part of the ways of working in terms of the Agile user-centred design model will make that work through the lower level as well as it being the right thing for the organisation that's already chosen the right sort of core top-level objectives to look at. Does that answer that?
That's helpful to know. I suppose if we've had all the discussion, then it would be even easier to say what we decided. So I would just welcome that. It's when you came last to the board, I found it a very helpful discussion about not just talking about the enormous technical potential that's out there, but understanding what are the things that need to be better, and trying to link them up. I thought that was a very helpful way of looking at it. And I suppose what I'm saying is just being a little bit clearer about that. Of course, we've got our strategy, and of course, we've got our strategic priorities, carefully constructed documents. But it would help me, at least, to have the slightly easier read version of where this will take us in terms of our public duty.
So page 4, Lewis, and the second number 2. If this speaks to your point, I think if I've understood it, I think it does, is about how the work that Peter's outlined will help those people who share their experiences about care and services that they've received can come through to us, and then how we can analyse and process that in a much more effective way than we do hitherto, because what we've got are over 30,000 text-based comments back about services, which at the minute are being manually searched and made sense of. And what this is doing is giving us the platforms on which some of this software that we bought in Endeca can do some of this literally in minutes. So I think that's the outcome from that work will be a significant improvement in the way we can receive text-based feedback from people who are using services about their experience of services. So it's not just that we'll receive it, but we'll be able to analyse it and process it in a way which we've not hitherto been able to do, because you'll know this from your research, because we've got people going through manually going through text-based material, which is pretty tricky, quite frankly. So I think there are some very specifics in here which will help the point that I think you're making. But I think to Peter's point, this is about how we take a big strategy and start practically on certain things that we know we can actually make work. So I think the danger is we see this as being the definitive prioritisation exercise, as opposed to these are the priorities we're going to begin on, and as we gain confidence and experience in doing this, we'll mature this as we go forward. So I have to say I'm delighted with the progress that we've made here, and that's not but it's not exclusive. This is the beginning of a quite inclusive process, and as this says, it will take time to get to the end of this stuff. And the financial planning for this, which was the other bit of Robert's question, I think is built into this. You know, we didn't spend some capital money last year, and one of the reasons, and I don't think that was a problem, because we didn't have a clarity about the priorities that we needed to invest on. And what this is doing is helping us to get to that clarity about the priorities. So, and as the very last paragraph in this report outlines, the next steps are bringing back to both the executive team and the board some of the detail about the approved cases, etc. So you do have a sense of momentum. You know, we need to remind ourselves that Peter's only been here a few weeks, and we've had a top-line report. We've now got this report, and then we'll get a costed programme for the next steps at the next board meeting. So it's very impressive progress.
Jora.
I wanted to ask you a slightly different strategic question. So we've got the strategy of the CQC and customers and patients. But then there's a digital strategy, and I was wondering if we're capturing that. So we know we're in a period of time of immense change, and change is happening at a series of knots that we've never seen before. And seriously now we're talking about big data, analytics, Internet of Things, sensors, machine learning, artificial intelligence. How do we know what we're doing here? Some of it won't be fit for purpose going forward, but how do we know we're not doing another big program in 2-3 years' time? Are you building it in such a way, and it's a difficult question, but are you building in such a way that allows us to bring in new technologies quite easily as you've built I think you talk about architecture in here. So are we building a digital strategy as well as helping the strategy of the CQC?
So I would say yes. It's early days, so we need to move forward a little bit on some of the detail of that. But to give some sort of examples, we are very actively making sure that the new services that we build in the first few projects are component-based, API-first type frameworks for building on top of. So information collection for adult social care is not a way of collecting data for adult social care. It's a way of linking a register of providers to a set of questions in a manner that gives us some answers that we might need to be able to interpret in many different ways, and they may be sort of text-based answers as well as specific numerical answers. So we're considering those concepts as separated concerns at the beginning, so it's very much a separation of concerns model from the outset. I think we are working from a baseline where we're only putting in some of they're not particularly advanced answers in terms of AI and some of those pieces. We need to get to that, but I think there's some foundations we need to get right before we consider those. But they certainly would appear on a roadmap. Effectively, we're taking away monolithic services such as a large CRM system and building component services that will work together and can easily be swapped in and out as needed. So that's the part of it. It's also worth noting that this is the model of what's happening inside CQC. We also have a role at NHSI and have a role in the National Information Board, and we're looking at these across the system. So, for example, we're already considering how we think about our own data services in conjunction with those at NHS Improvement so that we can reduce duplication. We're thinking about how we can feed information back directly to providers in a way that helps them with their own management information rather than for our own benefit. We're sort of building those concepts in from the ground up to everything that we do. So a long way to go, I think, is the short answer, but the foundations will be architected in a way that makes that easier rather than harder.
Helen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've never been in a meeting with you when you haven't spoken. So is there anything you want to add? I mean, there may not be, but if there is, please do.
Yeah, I think I can add to what Peter's just said in terms of the solution that we're putting in place will not prevent us or restrict us in any way from things we want to do in the future with regard to data science and AI and those sorts of things. So the team at the moment are in the process of creating the data science strategy. There's been lots of work underway already, but we're kind of trying to formulate what it means that we actually believe we need to do in order to deliver against our strategy in the future from a technical data analytic perspective. And Pete and I are working quite closely on what it means that all the things that he's doing now and developing and implementing from a solution perspective will enable us to be sort of technology agnostic in the future in terms of the sorts of things that we want to implement. So I'm comfortable that where we're going, even though I'm 4 weeks in and we haven't kind of formalised any of that yet, that we'll be building the solution in an agnostic way to enable us to do what we want to in the future.
Great. So I couldn't be clearer in my own mind what we're trying to achieve here. And I think I'm not going to rehearse it all now, but it does go back to the strategy. There are huge benefits for people who use services in being able to communicate with us more effectively and to be able to access our data much more effectively. So that's sort of driver one as far as I'm concerned. Driver two is there will be huge benefits for providers. Both in the way they communicate with us, but in a lot of other ways, including being able to get our reports out more quickly, and lots of different strands of benefit for providers. And the third big beneficiaries, if you like, will be our staff. We know from the staff survey that at the moment there's a lot of pressure on them to be able to do what they're tasked to do, and our systems don't always support them as well as they should or could. So that will be the third big benefit at the end of this process. And the fourth one is our own efficiency. We just won't be able to do our programmes on a reduced budget unless we have this to support it. So those are the four really big strands, if you like, that I think we're trying to achieve. Board have made some comments on governance. David and I, funnily enough, were talking about this night before last. And I think we have the main planks of governance in place already, and I would add the Finance Committee to your concerns about finance. We've got the Audit Committee. But I absolutely take the point, and it was what David and I were talking about, is there a bit that we need to add to make sure we have effective governance, but also can move with the pace that you need to move. I think, Jane, to your point around the board going forward, I was saying to Pete and Helen, I think they will be at most of our meetings for as long ahead as any of us can see. And I think we need to get to a point where the board has the clarity of where we should be, and therefore at any moment in time, and therefore the confidence that we are on track. And that's the challenge, to get that into a paper in what will be a very dynamic, ongoing situation. But that's what we will do. And I think, Pete, you've committed to come back to the next meeting with a slightly different, it'll look very different paper, and it'll be much more into this is what we're doing at the moment, and this is what we expect to deliver by when. So we'll have a sort of steps programme in there. So I think this is hugely, hugely important and hugely exciting. And unless anybody needs to add anything, I would just say I don't want to keep you from getting on with this. So thank you both very much indeed for coming today. Thank you very much for what you're doing. And thanks to everybody that's not in the room that's supporting you, both on the technology side, but as has been said many times, this isn't just about the technology. It's actually about how we work and all that goes behind that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Good. Thanks. So we then, David, do now, I think, come to your report, please.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm not going to present any performance information here because that's all in the Quarter 4 performance report, which I think is probably the next agenda item. So beginning on the second page, the numbered item 5, where we've looked at the issues around cyber security. Effectively what this is doing, Peter, is just providing an update to colleagues on the board about the ransomware attack on the 12th of May and the work that CQC undertook, both in terms of our own systems, which are stable, and the necessary work that required to be undertaken had indeed been undertaken. So we are assured of the stability of our own IT systems. But we also did work with the wider system and communicated with them about some of the issues in a supportive way. One of the key issues from the report that we published last July, Safe Data, Safe Care, where we made 6 recommendations, was the recommendation we effectively made to ourselves about building into our assessment framework and inspection approach assurance that the appropriate internal and external validation against the new data standards was being carried out as we undertake our inspections, and that our inspectors were trained in that. And as the paragraphs set out, that work has continued, and work on the standards has continued over the period since last summer. And our plan, our intention, both before this attack and confirmed in these paragraphs, is that we've built this into the next phase of our inspections, which will be published in June and will be part of our approach going forward. So that's the update in relation to the cyber attack. The other issue I'd like to report on is the fact that following some work over the previous 12 months or so, and following a request from Defence Medical Services to CQC, that we undertake a rolling programme of inspections of medical facilities, both in the UK and abroad. we've now signed a memorandum of understanding with Defence Medical Services. Indeed, I did that with the Surgeon General only yesterday, where we carry out, using our current inspection methodologies, inspections of the primary medical services and dental facilities, but also some of their community mental health and rehabilitation facilities. That work has begun. I think about 9 inspections have continued, and we're doing this under a service level agreement between ourselves and Defence Military Services. And I would like to commend Steve's team and the work that he's done, Ruth Rankin in particular and Gary Higgins, who I think have done some fabulous work here. And I have to say the senior military clinicians were very, very happy with the arrangements that are put in place as well. So the 2008 Act allows for us to help providing advice and assistance to all the public authorities, and that indeed is what we're doing through this contract. So I think what this will allow the military defence services to do is benchmark the quality of their services against other NHS services to ensure that their personnel are getting access to a standard of healthcare which compares to others, and they are keen to use that benchmark in their internal discussions about how they can take forward the development of their services. And then the last item, Peter and colleagues, is just to draw attention to something that we don't often do in our board meetings, but we felt was important to do, is just draw the board's attention to the Recognise an Outstanding Contribution Awards scheme that we launched also last spring, where this is a mechanism that we're using for staff within the organisation to nominate their colleagues or a team of their colleagues so that their work could be recognised because they've made some particular and special contribution to the work of the organisation and their teams. And as you can see from page 4, there's a variety of different awards: an Adult Social Care Individual Award, a Hospital Teams Award, etc. And as I wandered through Victoria the other day, you could see people returning from the Buckingham Palace garden parties. They were either dressed in military uniforms or in their finery. And one of the decisions that was taken was that the tickets that were sent for the garden party, 2 of those tickets should be made available for the winner, just as a way of providing a special celebration. I don't think everybody would necessarily value a trip to the palace, but I think the vast majority of our staff would, and I think it's a very special way of celebrating their achievements and doing something which many of us wouldn't get the chance to do otherwise. So again, I think that's part of just building a culture of recognising and acknowledging the contribution that our staff make on a daily basis. So that's the report, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we come on to the performance report, is there anything anybody wanted to raise? Steve and then Lewis.
Just for the public record on the awards, the primary medical service section of that was left off the paper, and therefore I'll submit our section, so for the public record it's in the minutes, if that's okay, Chair. Thanks.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks. I do have a question, but I wonder if you'd mind if I just said a quick word about Manchester and the NHS in Manchester, as we're the NHS regulator. Because, as you know, I live and work in Manchester. It's been a very bleak week in Manchester, but one positive thing has been the response of the NHS to this disaster. And there are lots of stories in the press, local press in particular, about the response of the ambulances, the hospitals, individual staff, people who came in having knocked off from work but came back, people who worked overnight, people who did extra shifts. It was a heroic effort by the NHS in response to this incident. The interesting thing, I think the staff in the NHS don't think of these things as heroic, because they genuinely do say, if you talk to people, that this was just people doing their job. And that's not false modesty. I think people just do think that way. And yet here was a real test of the NHS, testing it to the limits. It got through because of things which are very difficult to measure. It got through because of clinical skill, but also people's dedication, because of morale. Those things which matter so much to performance and to the care that people get. And there's no doubt that the NHS in Manchester will have saved people's lives. It will have improved damaged lives for years to come. And I just think it's very important that when we assess the NHS, we remember those qualities which we can't always easily reflect, but actually are crucial to people's care and the performance of the staff. I do have a more mundane question at the end of this, but it also has a Manchester connection, which is it's about substance misuse services, because there's been quite an important concern growing across healthcare about the state of substance misuse services. And this came to a head a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen a major provider in Manchester collapsed. Now, I don't expect to comment on that particular provider, but it did feed into a broader concern about the skills of substance misuse services, their ability to manage risk, as well as, in this case, aspects of their financial management. And there's a lot of concern about the viability and the suitability and the relationship with the NHS in these services. And I don't think we don't kind of a comprehensive discussion about this now, but because of the nature of these services, they're often quite marginal to almost everything. I just wonder whether we could come back to it at a certain point and have a proper discussion about that bit of the care system, which for various reasons isn't mainstream here and is touched on, as with Paul Elliott's presentation not very long ago, but we never quite get to grips with what we are doing and update on what we are doing to try and improve care in this area.
Let me ask Mike just to give a very brief comment, and we, of course, can come back to it, but it actually is something we have been talking a great deal about, so I think it might be helpful, Mike, just to say something now.
First, a very brief comment on the Manchester and the events of this week. David and I and others made very sure, first of all, that the CQC was not doing any inspections that would get in the way of people doing heroic tasks, as you've described. So that, fortunately, we weren't scheduled to be doing any that week, so that was okay. We've also kept very closely in touch with colleagues at NHS Improvement on the actual situation in those hospitals. So I think that covers that one. In terms of substance misuse services, Lewis, you'll remember that Paul Elliott has flagged this already. When we did a number of the early inspections, we found considerable problems, particularly with the medical oversight of detoxification. And on the basis of that, we actually wrote out to all providers of substance misuse services expressing our concerns in order that they could put things right before we came to inspect. So we are now doing the full round. You will know that as yet we do not have the powers to rate these services, but we do have the powers to inspect them, and indeed we have, in certain cases, had to close these down because of our concerns. In the particular instance you're referring to, which is of a chain of substance misuse services that collapsed for financial reasons, we've also been making very sure that the organisation that is taking those on, we are working with our colleagues in registration to make sure that is affected as smoothly as possible, so that there won't be any interruption in services.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anything else anybody wanted to pick up on David's report? So we'll move on to the performance report. Is Mark out there? If not, you might be all on your own, Kate. No. It's you. Yeah. It's you. Right. Okay. No. All right.
I think Mark's interviewing because of the backfill to Peter pinching people to go into the digital team at speed. So I think that's where he is just at the minute.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. So. You've got my dulcet tones for a little longer, I'm afraid. Any difficult questions, I'll pass off to my colleagues. But just on, if I just may say one thing about Manchester, Peter, this has been very close to home. We had a member of staff that was at the concert with a niece, and we also had a member of staff who had a son at the concert as well.
And what is quite noticeable, really, and speaks much of the organisation, is just the support and the help that they've been given and that they've acknowledged as well. So, Mike's point, we didn't just think about what it was that we needed to do in relation to our activity in Manchester. I think Steve's team were due to do a GP inspection in central Manchester that got deferred because of the issues. People, understandably had higher priorities. But I think our teams have been fantastically supportive to colleagues who've been impacted on this in quite a dramatic way. So this isn't just something that's happening out there, it's happening in here. And I've had the poem sent to me that was read out at the vigil by members of our Manchester staff who thought it was a celebration of the spirit of the city that they live in as well, Lewis, as well. So I'm sure you speak for other of our colleagues that live in the northwest of England who have similar feelings. But on to performance. I want to, if I may, Peter, just adopt a style in presenting this, which is to emphasise just what has been achieved this year. And I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the staff in the organisation and our managers, particularly the managers who supervise and work with those frontline staff for what I regard as being a very successful year in completing our inspection programme. So it was an ambitious programme, but also the progress we've made on delivering on the business plan. And I think doing that within the financial envelope that we've set, where I think we've demonstrated we've been both more productive and more efficient in the way that we've used resources. And we will look at those issues which we've not made as much progress on, but I don't think they should diminish from what has been a year of quite considerable achievement by our staff. And I'd like to invite the board to just join in some celebration of those achievements. We'll set this out more fully in our annual report, which will go to Parliament, but I do think it's very, very important to highlight what we've achieved in this year. So paragraph 3 of this report is really setting out the high-level summary of what we've managed to achieve across all 3 inspection directorates, but also in terms of our progress in registering new services which have come forward, where I think there's been some quite impressive improvement by registration colleagues. But equally, we've not done this by focusing just on the act of inspection. We have increased the amount of enforcement action we've taken. Parliament gave us powers to take action where we find poor care, and I think Parliament and public would expect us to use those powers, and I think that's what we're demonstrating in here. I think this is part of us becoming an effective and credible regulator in terms of the work that we undertake of challenging care which is unacceptable and poor where we find it. I think the good news is we have a duty to encourage improvement in services, and I think the evidence is that where we go back and re-inspect, there is evidence of significant improvement taking place. Our workforce numbers are strong and positive, and we continue to recruit and add to our numbers from people who want to come and work with us and join us in our responsibilities of assuring the quality of care. We do ask people that we regulate, how was it for you? Did you find the process help you improve? Did you find our staff knowledgeable about the functions that they were inspecting? And again, we draw attention in the report to the feedback, which again helps us to improve what we do, but also gives us some quite positive feedback on what we've managed to achieve. We've underspent our budget for 16-17 by just over £14 million. And I think that's a positive issue. But the key issue here is because people would say, well, we've all underspent our budget, but we have got ourselves to a position where we're beginning to actively manage our budget, and we find ourselves in a position not by accident but by design and by active management. The other consequence of this is that we know, and we can demonstrate, and the figures are in the detail of the report, that we're much more efficient in the way that we're using our resources and the way that that money is being used. I'm not going to go into the very fine detail, Peter. If I hold it there, there's a very, very dense and rich set of slides which goes into these. I don't want to duck the issues about that which we need to continue to improve on, so the productivity of our reporting. I think there is improvement that has taken place month on month throughout the year in relation to that, but we still need to advance the work that we're doing. Second opinion doctors, we're not performing to the level that we've set for ourselves that we know we need to perform to, and there are programmes of work in respect of these issues. So I do want to acknowledge that there is more that we can do, but I think we should draw some satisfaction whilst remaining humble about what we've managed to achieve and more to do. So if I leave it there, Peter, and then I'm sure colleagues can answer any questions that come out if I'm not able to answer them.
Great, thank you, David. Questions or comments from anybody? David, could I just pick up on that last point about the second opinion doctors? Mike, can you enlighten us as to what we are doing?
This has been a problem for quite a long time. The real difficulty is in recruiting psychiatrists to take on this work, and particularly difficulty recruiting psychiatrists in certain parts of the country, and for the most urgent of the opinions, which are usually the ones associated with ECT therapy. So what we are doing about it is to make the recruitment more attractive by increasing the pay, and we will introduce a differential so that there will be more for doing the more urgent ones and those in the parts of the country where we find it most difficult to recruit.
Thank you, Mike. Lewis, you looked as if you were about to...
Not about that.
Yep.
Well, first of all, it's a fantastic report. It's incredibly data-rich, and you know how we love data-rich documents, so I think it's been really helpful. But I want to pick up something which actually we were talking about earlier in the private report, which is about the importance of driving improvement, because it's quite an interesting story that it tells, I think, if you look at different parts of the data. And this, of course, I think is going to become our, almost our main mission, to not just reflect the quality of services, but to help encourage improvement. If you have to sort of link some of these slides together, but it's quite interesting that on slide 11, which is the one where we ask people's opinion, I think is the one that you're referring to, and we've done an interesting thing, which is ask people's opinion, the organisations, whether they, we've presented the figures at least, whether or not they received a good rating, essentially, or a not-so-good rating, to see how different they are. And on some of them, they're different, as you might expect. People who get a bad rating are less positive about what CQC did for them. But actually, not on all. And sometimes a poorly rated organisation says, but it helped us understand what we had to do. And that seems to me to be a very positive thing. However, if you then go to slide 15, which I suppose for me has become the heart of CQC's mission, there is this evidence that some organisations which are poorly rated improve, but quite a few don't. So those that get a rating of inadequate, so if you look at that slide 15, and it's the purple box there, the Care Quality Commission, that's our overall ratings. Some will certainly improve, but on re-inspection, 22% are still inadequate. Of those that requires improvement, about half of them do improve, but the other half don't. And in fact, a small number of them get worse. So it's a familiar thing. We've talked about it before, but it does encapsulate the nature of the problem. So they're saying, yes, it was really helpful to hear what you said about us. We understood what we needed to do, but actually half of the organisations are then not improving. And then when you get to slide 40, which is our strategic risks, where this appears as at the top of the list, encouraging improvement, we recognise that it needs a red rating, but after mitigation, I suppose, once considering what we're doing about it, we downgrade the risk from red to amber and say that our confidence is high that we're able to address the issue. So that's the first row of slide 40. Yep. So just putting those things together, there's a response from the field, which is, yes, we've understood what you're trying to tell us. There's a partial effect as far as we find when we go back. But we're quite confident in a way. We're recognising the risk, but reporting confidence that this situation will improve. And I just wonder given that the picture is quite a mixed one, why we're as confident as that.
So the way I'd answer that is I think this goes to the heart of where we are in terms of our development and maturity. So I don't want to make any big claims about this, Lewis, but people say this to us, we're on a journey, and we are. So the fact that you can answer that question, you could not have asked that question 12 months ago. You certainly couldn't have asked it 24 months ago, and you wouldn't have got... Yeah, but you couldn't have asked it with a precision. You would have asked, I wonder what if. We can now do this on data that we've generated, and quite frankly, I do have some confidence in the data that we've got in front of us to allow us to do this. I think this goes to the heart of the issue about our role and how do we know we're discharging our role and how do we know we're being effective. But also, improvement isn't down to us. The people that improve services are the people that worked in them. You've paid tribute to the people that did all that work in Manchester in one of your opening comments, and it is true. It's the people that work in services do this. So I'm not looking to deflect this. I think it's a hugely important question. But I think... we are confident. We do know that it took Medway, 3 years to get out of special measures to improve, but they actually got there. What did we learn about that? We learned that they needed help and support to get through that. So I think we can now tell a story that hitherto we wouldn't have been able to tell. So that's the way I'd go. I don't think it's the complete answer. I think there's more that we need to do.
Okay. So maybe I should have asked the question in a slightly different way, which is that we are in the middle of a sort of natural experiment in a way. And we will have experience through the work we do on this question of what it is that helps some organisations improve and some organisations either stagnate or sink back. And it's to emphasise the importance of the next phase here in understanding the crucial question of why organisations recover and why they don't.
So there's lots of people who want to come in, but can I just say this? I think when I look at the strategic risks, I think the one that you're referring to does not say, are we confident that everybody is improving? What it actually says is, are we confident that we are encouraging improvement? And I think you yourself said there is evidence that in many places we are, and the fact it's not universal doesn't negate the point in the strategic risk register. It also doesn't negate the point that you made just now, that this is really important and we need to continue. Let me bring in Paul and then Mike.
I think the journey and the learning is our responsibility now, in response to what Lewis has said, is to use this data to encourage. And I think in the past we have quite rightly said improvement isn't our business and leant back. And I don't think we can do that anymore. I think we need to say improvement isn't our business, but come on, right? Look at this data. And our job is to produce that data that we didn't have before. And that the incongruity between one group standing still and going back a bit and another group going forward, we now know who they are and we know what they do. And we therefore have a responsibility to not just publish that and lean back, but to actually say, we now expect you to take this data seriously. And that is where we are today and weren't last year. But in a year's time, It's how we use that data, rather than just expect others to use it in a hands-off way, I think will be judged by how, whilst this isn't our business, we are demonstrating to people what the knowledge base is in our society.
Yeah, I thank you, Paul. Really good. Mike, did you want to add something?
Yes, I've actually been very impressed and pleased that as many trusts have shown improvement. I think it's important to recognise that with a trust with multiple services, it's quite a big step to go, say, from requires improvement to good. But we have seen that happen. We've seen a number of trusts that have actually moved up 2 grades, from inadequate to good, or in one case from requires improvement to outstanding, during the last 3 years. Now, you're absolutely right that hasn't happened in each and every hospital, and as David pointed out, in some it takes longer than others. What I think we are learning, and we're doing this jointly with NHS Improvement, is we are learning what the characteristics are of improving trusts versus those that get more stuck. And so I think we will be able to use that with our other partner organisations to help drive faster improvement in the future.
And I think just to pick up, Lewis and Paul, on your points, we are planning to publish a document later in June, which is less about the data, but is more about what is it that those trusts that have got outstanding ratings or have improved their ratings, what is it that they've done? What are the essential characteristics? And I think board members will get an opportunity to look at some of that material later this afternoon. Not the draft of the document, but some of that. And I think the purpose of that, I think, is trying to pick up on what Paul was saying, which is, given that we're a Mike's team, because it is about the NHS is this one, but I think we need to do this for the other sectors as well. Given we've now completed the comprehensive rating programme, what have we learned about what it is that makes these services outstanding or allows them to improve at the rate that they have? So the document is trying to fillet those issues, and perhaps one of the things we might need to do is support it with some of the statistical evidence and in the way that you've asked the question. So it's not just a narrative about the stories that are being told, but actually bring some of this in. But so I think we are trying to get in the space that Paul was encouraging in his point, which is we do have a responsibility to say what is it that has defined and characterised these organisations which have improved, and set that out.
Jane, and then Robert.
One comment about social care and one question about the CQC's own budget profile. I suppose I'm always surprised, and it's not expecting a big answer from Andrew now, but I'm always surprised by how well social care does in our inspection system. Given given the noise, given what we hear at Healthwatch. So I just put that comment out there. I'm always surprised by how well it does. Looking at the CQC's budget profile, and its consistent and amazing ability to underspend, and we've just been doing this and looking at this at Healthwatch ourselves. We've done a bit of that ourselves. What lessons have you learnt, Kate, that would give the board increasing confidence that the budget profile for the coming year is going to be more closely followed?
So I think that the lessons that we've learnt from last year is that actually that the staff that we employ have really taken on the need to make savings, and they've understood the message that we need to get to where we need to, under the spending review, to below 217 million by 1920, and that actually they've done that far more quickly than we anticipated, which has been absolutely great. What we've done this year for setting the budget, we went really back to basics, almost back to not quite a zero-based budget, but we actually asked people what they needed rather than using the previous year's budget as the baseline. So we've asked people what they need, and we've built up the budgets from that. So we have more confidence that they will actually spend to their budget profile for this year. And we've also introduced a key performance indicator that people shouldn't have a variance of more than 2% on that. Will help, hopefully. Thank you.
Andrea.
Just to respond to Jane's comment, And I think the issue that we need to remember is the volume that we're dealing with here. So, yes, we're saying that 75% of services are good, 1% are outstanding, and that's fantastic. We should be positive about it. We should celebrate that. And, as David quite rightly says, highlight those characteristics which we can demonstrate to others that they need to adopt and adapt so that they can get to that level. But it's nearly 5,000 services that are designated as requires improvement. And if you take the most conservative of estimates in terms of the numbers of people who might be using those services, so let's just say we times that by 30 people, then that's 150,000 people. And if you do that on the inadequates, that's nearly 20,000 people. So that's a headline in a local newspaper every day. And it impacts on people's entire lives, because either they're living in an institution, for a care home or a residential home, or indeed they're living at home and their entire lives is impacted upon by how the domiciliary care service is being provided. So I think you're right, the volume of information that we get about poor adult social care services will be high, because we're impacting on a lot of people's lives. So I think that we have to always remember that we are doing well, and the sector is doing well. Very often, as you can see in the fact that caring comes out as well as it does, an awful lot of that is down to staff doing a fantastic job by despite the system, not because of the system. And we get a lot of comments back, which is that they love the people that are providing the care, but it's the reliability of it, say, for example, in domiciliary care, that's an issue. So I think it's kind of seeing the big picture allows you to understand that issue about signal and noise, which is something that Lewis is always reminding us of in terms of what actually is happening in the sector. So we cannot be complacent about these figures at all.
Thank you. Eileen, could I, if you look at slide 19, we've met or exceeded our targets right the way through the year in responding to people who've contacted the contact centre, until we get to March, and something seems to have happened in March, and so sort of two parts of the question. What happened in March, but probably a more important part of the question is this an ongoing, whatever it is, or are we back on track?
Yes, you're quite right, Peter. There has been a fall-off in this, and it's not something that we take at all lightly. I think colleagues will remember that we, over 12 months ago, began a programme of what we called modernisation across aspects of CQC, and that included the contact centre, which is essentially the front door of the organisation. And it's been a very significant, and continues to be a very significant, programme of change there. So in that final month of the year and into April, essentially all the staff in the NCSC were being interviewed for roles or being assigned to roles, so very significant churn and change for them. And that's ongoing. So we are going to see, and I can only apologise for it, but say it is actually anticipated. All directorates have had communications about the fact this was anticipated. We've got ongoing training of staff into new roles with a view that we are ever more professionalising the way in which that front door of CQC is opened, looking very closely at performance. And I will be coming back next month, and I suspect the following month, to say that we're not meeting our KPIs, but we do have a programme in place to ensure that we get back there. And actually, as we're getting back there, that people who contact us are receiving a better service.
I mean, I understand, but I think this is really important, and some of these contacts are urgent. So I understand, obviously, we have to go through the process, but I think it would be good if we could have an update at the next board meeting.
Absolutely, and to assure people that we're not losing the people who contact us urgently. They're not getting lost to us. It's just the speed of dealing with it is being diminished. So I wouldn't want to give any sense that we are losing people and their contacts. They remain our primary focus. Really is the speed of work, and indeed I'm in Newcastle next week for 2 days to actually look at the programme of getting things back to KPI, Peter.
Okay, that's great, but an update next month would be even better. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much. Anything, Robert?
Funnily enough, it's about the same slide. And I see what we measure here, and that's informative. But both in relation to the raising of concerns and whistleblowing, and I need reminding whether concerns include concerns raised by staff as well as by the public, or whether they're all in the whistleblowing category. We're here quite rightly focusing on the time taken to do something. But what's not clear to me, and therefore I suspect, I don't know if we measure it, is actually what the outcome is in relation to the raising of a concern or a whistleblowing report, in the sense of was some difference? Was there some? Did the raising of the concern or the raising of the whistleblowing issue make a difference to either the inspection outcome or improvement for patients or whatever? Because I suspect what the public would like to know, and perhaps even more so those who raise the concerns, or sometimes very bravely members of staff raise things, and we see this all the time actually in the adult social care reports we receive, that what they have done has made a difference. And sometimes I worry that what we tell the people who do this is what you have told us is important to us, which I'm sure it is, and that's true. But what actually happens, have they made a difference, and how do we evidence that? And is it possible indeed to measure it? But if we don't do something like that, I wonder whether the sorts of thing people eventually lose heart in raising concerns.
Shall I come back? And I'm going to invite the Chief Inspectors to make some comments about things that are very particular to their areas of work, Peter. But if I look at whistleblowing in particular, where we get, under the very precise definition of whistleblowing, over 7,500 contacts a year, it's important to say that we do understand what we do with that information, and we positively encourage people to come to us, because it is part of the intelligence that allows us to be intelligence-driven, which is, after all, part of our strategy. So if we go to the whistleblowing, 85% of the contacts, won't surprise you to hear, come from the adult social care area. So we understand where they're coming from, and that's really important. We understand if they're clustered around providers, and that does allow people, and inspectors in particular, to understand patterns and to be able to make judgments about what they do with it. For 10% of that 7,500, they are deemed to be so serious that they actually trigger an immediate responsive inspection, or they bring forward the date of a planned inspection. So I think it's very important to say, do we know what we're doing, and does this information have an impact? Then yes, it definitely does. 25% of them, actually, we're the first point of contact, but we're not the people who can do something, but we take our responsibility about passing that information on to those, particularly local authorities. So we do that, and we do it very effectively, and we have very good relationships with our local authorities. So we always make clear to people that we're not the body that can actually do what's required, but we take it seriously, and we are passing things on. So I hope that gives you a sense that we take our responsibilities very seriously. And as our abilities with technology and being able to tag things to a provider become ever more sophisticated, I think the view is that under the well-led domain that we look at, that increasingly our inspectors under their dashboards will have a really good and dynamic picture of our concerns being raised, is whistleblowing coming in, and are able to work with it, as I say, in that very dynamic way. But for the most serious, or those where actually there's another body that is the responsible authority and we need to get things to them quickly, I would want to give every sense that we are doing things with them.
Well, absolutely understand that, and I think that's all to the good. But I understand also how difficult it is to reduce some of that to a quantification that is in any way meaningful. But for instance, in our adult social care reports, and sometimes in the hospital reports, we will see an account is given that we did this because whistleblowers told us about it, and this is what we found. And I just wonder whether there might be some way of actually collating that experience so that it actually evidences exactly the points you have been making, to show the people who actually take the trouble to give this information to us that they have made a difference.
I think that's incredibly important, and as you know, it's a national agenda that this should be happening, Robert. So we will be publishing every year a report on what we do with whistleblowing, and it will have the granular detail and it will have the case studies, and I hope will encourage people to come to us in ever greater volumes. It's not a bad signal to have 7,500 people approaching us. We think it's very sad that they feel that they must, that situations occur, but good that they actually have the confidence to come somewhere. But I know Andrea's got some very good experience that she can refer to.
And it's just to say that, as you quite rightly say, Robert, there's a number of our reports and on the inspections that we've undertaken because we have had information either from members of staff or indeed for people who are using services or their families and carers. And we do set that out. It goes back to that there are two issues, though. One is, how do we go back to the individuals and let them know that that's what we've done with the information and this is the outcome? And we have not always been as good as we should have been at actually responding. Sometimes we can't because it's been anonymously provided to us. But you know, one of the things that my teams are very mindful of doing is making sure that where they can, they respond to the individuals that's raised the concerns so that they're assured that we have taken that seriously and what we've done where that has been the case. The second thing, I think, is for us to be a bit more assiduous around demonstrating that. And it goes to Paul's point. It's not just about using our information to demonstrate how people can improve, but it's also about using our information to demonstrate how we've been responsive to people. And the tools that David was referring to earlier that can enable us to do qualitative assessments of our reports. So, you know, search for the phrase that says, and we undertook this inspection because of concerns that were raised with us, etc., etc. We can do that now using those tools in a way that we couldn't have done before. It would have been a manual exercise to go through all of our inadequate reports and kind of found that. So I think that one of the things that we should do is to talk to the analytics team about whether we can, and I think it would apply across all three sectors, whether we can do that sort of analysis and actually demonstrate that in either the report that Eileen's referring to or in some other way in state of care perhaps that demonstrates that how we have been doing that.
Okay, Paul, shall we, David, have a quick look at the risk register next, please, then?
Thank you, Peter. So that was a conversation about performance, which was helpful. The report, the covering report, also goes on in get the right paragraphs. Paragraph 16, which begins on page 11, the strategic and the operational risks. And I'm not going to repeat what's set out there, and Lewis has already drawn attention in part to one of the risks that's there. But if I could just emphasise something on Annex 2 of the risk register, which is risk 9, which is in relation to IT technologies and systems. And I think there was a gremlin in the way the report was produced, for which my apologies. I take responsibility for this, which had the pre- and post-mitigation risk at red and 16, pre and post. And Peter was here earlier setting out some of the work in the digital strategy. Annex 2, risk 9, is the risk register for 17-18. So just to emphasise that, it's not for 16-17, which is what the rest of this report relates to. And some further work has been done on this so that the post-mitigation risk reads differently to the pre-mitigation risk. The importance of this is otherwise we're saying we're having no impact on this whatsoever. And as we did and we heard from Peter earlier, a considerable amount of progress has been made over the past few weeks, a couple of months or so in relation to this. So yesterday, through the Secretariat, we issued not an addendum but an erratum to this performance report at risk 9, which actually sets out what the original risk is, but also sets out the mitigating action which is now put in place. And as a consequence of this, I'm asking you to note a revision to the actual risk rating. I think it's now from red and 16, which is a top rating, the top risk, is now amber and 9. The key issue here is that it's not red and 16 at post-mitigation. I'm not going to get into a higher form of science about why the number is 9, Lewis, or why it's not 16, just to head you off at the pass. But this is the result of the work that Mark Edmonds, who looks after the risk register and this performance report that we've just considered, and Peter have put together following conversations yesterday. So this isn't my number. This is a number that has come out of the conversation between the custodian of the register, if you wish, and the person responsible for the work. So I don't want to overemphasise that point, but I do want to draw your attention to the erratum. The rest of the risk register stays as it has been, as Paul's committee at ACGC have looked at this during 16-17. Also, Peter, just to conclude my bit, I hope, is just draw attention to the business planning milestones for the 16-17 business plan, where we go back and review this. And we don't spend a long time on this in our normal meetings. I think it just emphasises a point that I wanted to make at the beginning of the meeting. An awful lot of what we set out to do at the beginning of this year, we've actually achieved, although some continues into this year. Again, I think it reflects well the work that has gone on. And I think I can say that with some confidence. Paul chaired Audit and Corporate Governance Committee this week. And one of the conversations we had with our auditors was the progress that we're making against the audit action plans, which are also set out here for completeness. I think that's all I wanted to draw attention to outside of the overall performance, so thank you.
Thank you. In my non-scientific way, coming back to the risk register, since we are on track at this moment in time with where we thought we would be and wanted to be, as we discussed with Pete earlier, it couldn't possibly be right to say that the post-mitigation risk was red. So thank you for whatever happened yesterday to correct the error. It was there. Really good. Anything anybody wants to raise on any of the performance reports, including the risk register business plan? Okay. From the board, is there any other business anybody wants to raise? Okay, so that finishes the board meeting, but we do have a few minutes if there's anybody who wants to raise anything from the public. Robin, yes. Robin, the risk of sounding ridiculous, you will just need to say who you are and you'll need to turn your microphone on, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike, I'm from Healthwatch Hertfordshire. This isn't actually a question, but as a member of the public who's been attending the public board meeting since almost the beginning of the Commission's life, I would like to give my own congratulation to having completed the programme of inspections in what has been a very short period of time, from a standing start essentially, and with a background of the preceding organisation that had some difficulties. If I could present to the board something which relates to my question in April. This is an anecdotal report, really, of an occasion when I was a patient at a London hospital in an outpatient department, sitting at or in a corridor, waiting to see the doctor. The gentleman next to me turned to me and asked if I knew the result of the football match last night. And that was a Champions League match that had been on television, I think. He explained to me that he had left home where he'd had to go to bed at half-time. And he had left home at 3 a.m. with his wife to drive him to Taunton, I think it was, in the West Country, so that he could catch his coach to London, where he arrived, I think he said about 8 o'clock, and then he walked to the hospital. And sometimes the system of the NHS somehow doesn't see behind the individual patient and their number and the data that relates to them, and doesn't always comprehend some of their individual experiences. This may be in part waiting time. I should say that this gentleman was not complaining in any sense at all. He was very pleased to be able to attend the hospital. He wasn't complaining. That was his journey. And the wait, which is frequently an hour, which again patients don't generally grumble about, is often followed by further waits for blood tests or pharmacy dispensing. And just to bring back to the board some of the finer details of patient experience.
So, Robin, first of all, thank you for your nice words at the start on the completion of the programme. You're absolutely right. It's a great milestone for us. Your comments about responsiveness of services to patient needs, I think, is something that we would all very much identify with. I don't know whether any of the three chief inspectors want to add anything. Mike, do you want to?
Only to say that it is something that we do inspect for, that in the responsiveness key question, particularly when, as in this case by the sound of it, in outpatients, we will ask about waiting, and we often do then actually take action on that, because we have seen people waiting far too long. In otherwise good hospitals, and then we have taken action, and in some cases we have declared that the outpatient service is inadequate on the basis of that.
Andrew?
And just to emphasise what you have that's effectively behind your question, Robin, which is that we need to be thinking about the people who are using services, and it's not just about the data, and it is about person-centred care and ensuring that all services are mindful of that. And I think that the work that was done and was demonstrated in the State of Care report last year, from an adult social care point of view, but actually also from primary medical services and hospitals, is that where we saw that people really took that seriously, were really focusing on person-centred care and being responsive, those were the good and outstanding services that we saw. So it's not an optional extra for people to do that. It's actually at the heart of what we need organisations and systems as well as individual staff to be doing, and the best people are doing that. But that's why we need to be continually kind of promoting the importance of it being about the people, which is the reason why I use the mum test in terms of, is this a service that I would be happy for my mum or anybody I love to use? And if it is, that's great. But if it's not, we have to do something about it.
Robin, thank you very much indeed for that. We had a question that Jade Taylor wrote to me about. Jade, as many people will know, was a frequent attender at these meetings and not able to be here herself, but she asked if I would read out, and she asked that it was made clear that the question was from her in a personal capacity. Can the board provide the reasons as to why protecting whistleblowers from suffering detriment is so vital for the safety of service users and patients? I suspect there could be quite a long answer to that, but David, do you want to give a very short answer?
I think the man on your right set this out in his report earlier, that this is about creating a culture of openness and transparency in organisations, and I think the short answer is that.
if staff don't feel free to raise concerns around patient safety, then the consequence of that is some people are going to get suboptimal care and indeed can potentially be harmed. And the importance of open and transparent organisations where people feel free to be able to raise their concerns is one about improving patient care. There's a direct link to openness and transparency and improved patient care.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Nothing else? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you. I'm a virgin here because it's my first time. But I'd like to say that I'm...
Can you just say who you are?
My name's Jane Connery.
Thank you.
I've met the lovely Andrea a couple of times in my campaign capacity to bring transparency into the adult care system. My mother has dementia. She was abused 3 times in 3 separate care facilities. I do not blame the carers. They were brilliant. It was to do with, a lot of the time, profit over care. However, I know how the business works, and I'm not against private enterprise if they bring the care that is deserved and required. I agree with what the CQC do. I think you do a phenomenal job, a hard job, and I admire Andrea Sutcliffe tremendously. I've met her, as I said, as my capacity as a campaigner. I want to see CCTV in communal areas, exits and entrances of all dementia care homes. I have 55,000 people supporting my online campaign. I've just been to 10 Downing Street, and my local MP is for it. Sir David, I'm looking at you because I've always wanted to meet you. And I'm hoping after the meeting I can have a quick minute of your time. It's very important to me because I've seen firsthand as a campaigner, I get messages daily of horrific images. And I know that the CQC are doing a phenomenal job, and I think more so as this year, last year, I think you're going out there and you're really trying to make a difference, and for that I'd like to thank you. And that's it. So thank you very much.
I don't want to stand between you and meeting the lovely Sir David, who's nearly as lovely as the lovely Andrea,
Yeah.
but we can do that after the meeting. But can I just quickly say that this is a subject that's come up a great deal. You will know that we have guidance at the moment on this. You'll also know that technology is changing all the time. And so we will be updating that guidance. It may not do exactly what you want, but I think it will, I hope it will encourage more people to understand how the sorts of technology you're talking about, because it's not just CCTV, there are other technologies, aren't there, audio technologies and so on, might provide additional comfort and security. So we're on the cases.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Right. I think that is it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming, everybody, and we'll meet in a month's time. Thank you.